Thank you all for joining us for SICSS-Howard Mathematica's closing plenary with Jeff Bernson. It's my pleasure to introduce Akira Bell, Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer of Mathematica, who will officially open our event and introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Nanette. And thank you to all of the participants. It is my treat to be able to sit in on your presentations every year. And it is my favorite day of the SICSS program. So thank you for allowing me to be here and listen to all of your work and all of your research. And I'm even more excited to continue to hear from you. Hopefully, some of you will be applying for grants to continue the work that you've already started and are well on your way. But I'm really excited to introduce you to our final speaker of the Institute, Jeff Bernson. He is the Senior Vice President and General Manager of our Mathematica International Unit. He joined in 2003, so he has now unseated me as the new person. Because I joined 5 years ago. But he leads Mathematica's global portfolio of focusing on low and middle income countries that span education, agriculture, health, climate, energy, gender equity, among others. His multidisciplinary teams are made up of sector experts, researchers, evaluators, methodologists, data analysts, visualization experts, data collection, and data management specialists who are focused on generating evidence and that instigate action. Before joining Mathematica in 2003, Bernson was Chief Program and Innovation Officer at PATH. And during his time at PATH, he also served in a variety of roles, including Vice President of Technology, which I love about him, Analytics, and Market Innovation. And as a Senior Director, working in its Nairobi, Kenya office. Jeff holds a master's in public administration and a master's in public health from the University of Washington. And just based on the short time that Jeff has been here with Mathematica, I know that he is going to be my brother in progress here at Mathematica. I am so excited and thrilled that he is with us and is already making waves with us on the team. So without anything further, here's Jeff.
Thanks, Akira. And thanks, Nanette, for letting me be here. It's a privilege. I have to tell you that I had some comments and some talking points set up, and then I attended all of the presentations in the last couple hours. And so I've changed a few things just because I am so blown away by what I've seen in the presentations. And I know that some of you have only been working on this stuff for the better part of a week. Others, this is a major part of what you're doing in your postdoc or in your doctorate program. So, but nonetheless, it's really, really fascinating, cool, interesting stuff that you guys are into. And just very appreciative. It's a privilege, quite honestly, to be here. And I also just want to say it's a privilege for Mathematica. It's probably been said before, but for us to support the SICSS program, I don't know, Nanette, if it was mentioned before, but we are planning on supporting a SICSS site next year in Nigeria. And I think it's just the beginning of what we can do together. I look across the skill set that this team presents, and I'm just like, watch out, next generation, this is, it is upon us. So I'm just, hugely in awe. I guess the reason why I am in awe, it's a few different parts, but I think a lot of us come together in this space because we believe in the power of evidence generation and the power that mobilizing evidence in the hands of decision makers and policymakers is a powerful thing. I've seen it in my own career and have been able to be on the sidelines of what happens when evidence gets into the power of decision makers, both at local and national levels, and then watch how programs and interventions can be changed, especially in the international arenas. Primarily, my focus has been in East Africa, where I lived for a period of time, and also in Southern Africa. And that's a powerful thing to watch. I used to say that evidence generation was a growth industry because there's so much of a need for it, and now it has to be, I think, a growth industry, given the fact that if you look around, what's upon us is just tremendous change. We've all lived through a pandemic, but that's the least of it in some respects of what's happening in our world. We're being faced with so many different tests, both at individual, community, and all the way up to national and global levels. And these tests range from environmental problems that we're all trying to tackle or living through, pandemics, financial crises, as well as things that we haven't even conceived of yet. And I think also it's not just one thing either. These things are all starting to come together and produce tremendous challenges for us as societies and governments to struggle through. And so that really, I think, puts us in a place where this generation of researchers and evaluators are going to be increasingly relied upon to not just generate this evidence, but put it in a place where it can be much more easily mobilized, and in a way that's much more digestible and actionable in the future. And I look around at the kinds of methods and approaches that this group is already into and using, and I'm just cheering because I think that in part that is in part some of the disruption that's going to be required. So as Akira mentioned in her opening, I've always been attracted to technology as that catalyst, right, to be disruptive in that space. And we've talked in the last sessions about sort of, and not just talked, you guys have demonstrated the power of some of the computational approaches that you're already using, both quantitative and qualitative. And I think that those skill sets are growing, and they will continue to grow even stronger and be needed to challenge these vexing issues that are upon us. There's another side to this too, which is as important, which is that, in addition to all of these challenges that we're faced with, we're also faced with just an immense amount of misinformation and disinformation in our space. And so this is the group, and these are the kinds of technologies and approaches that can be used nefariously, and then also can be used for a lot of good. And so I'm just buoyed by the fact that we have SICSS who are really starting to create the space for all of you to continue to expose, explore, and explain different approaches that we can use to both tackle the challenges and also mitigate some of the misinformation, disinformation that's out there. So that's why I'm encouraged, I guess. And I guess what I want to do for the remainder part of my comments, which I promise will not go on for very long, is really encourage you all to continue to be disruptive in this space. I think technology, as I mentioned, is one of those places where we can continue to do that. But just as I heard the presentations in this space, there are other aspects of what you're doing that I think can continue to disrupt how we think about things and how we get actionable information and evidence into the hands of people who are going to create and instigate better policies. One of the things that I saw was just the fact that this group is not afraid to ask hard questions or deal with the messiness that's involved with answering hard questions. Multiple times throughout the last sets of presentations, I heard folks really struggling with not just the methods and the approaches, right, but just how messy the data can be in this space. And I think that what I would do is just really encourage everyone to really continue to lean in. The places where the data isn't messy, the places where we already have strong signals, I think that there are lots of people who are set up really well to continue to answer questions from those types of data sets. It's the messy data, it's the weak signals that we need to really peer into, really need to interrogate, so we can start to ask harder questions and also get better information out there that people understand is the new evidence that we have to pay attention to. The other theme that I heard throughout was just this this charge that all of you took, and whether your projects were extremely mature or whether they were just launching, of just trying to make the invisible visible. So some of you are dealing with vulnerable populations or questions of bias or migration or yeah, there's such a variety of questions that we were dealing with, but a common thread throughout was just really trying to expose the invisibility behind those questions or populations that you were dealing with, and that is so important. Obviously, I am tied to that because I think it's a major part of the work that we try to do at Mathematica, especially in the international portfolio. But you've all displayed that this is a frame that you can use no matter where you're focused. I think the other theme I would point out is just most of you really talked about how you went beyond your own discipline. And that was a lesson learned, I think, very early on in my own career, of just focusing on the fact that a lot of hard questions are best answered through a multidisciplinary lens. And so someone who comes from public health, like myself, it's sometimes very hard to reach beyond that silo to go ahead and answer those questions. And yet for each one of you, I heard you pulling in methods and approaches, and also at some points, things that you weren't even familiar with. And then also calling on different colleagues or different expertise to expand the aperture of your thinking. And I think that that's so critical. There are some disciplines that do that better than others, but we all can sort of learn from that approach. And I think it continues to be that perspective that allows us to be disruptive in our own environments. And then each one of you also, and I think this is just the value of SICSS, right? But felt free to experiment. I counted a number of times where folks were taking on different methods and approaches that they didn't know or had just learned in the last 6 months, or even maybe even sooner than that. And so that was really, really exciting to me, because I think it's that joy of experimentation that allows us to continue to push on beyond our boundaries. So many times I've seen researchers and evaluators kind of get stuck when we're asked to move beyond the familiar, right? Beyond what we learned in our graduate studies or in our PhD, et cetera, and really letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I really think, I mean, it may sound cliche, but that whole experimentation process that many of you went through in this program, I think if you can continue to carry that as a red thread throughout your careers, I think that, first of all, you'll be better off, but second of all, we'll continue to generate more solid and clear evidence that, again, is multidisciplinary. And then I think maybe two last points. One is, I think while what we're seeing is more with the methods and approaches that we're developing in the research and evaluation spaces, we are striving increasingly more for some of those insights, right? More for some of those pieces that are going to allow decision makers to make the next best decision. I think the exciting thing for me is when those insights, when we can start to translate some of those insights into foresight. And I think that that's been the challenge, quite honestly, that we've faced in the evaluation and research space, where so oftentimes we're looking back for the answer. And we have these sort of linear models of evaluation that we have kind of traditionally used. And what I love about this group is you guys are breaking those barriers down, and you're starting to look at not just computational approaches that allow us to be more predictive and more focused on what might happen or what will happen, and start to build out those scenarios. But I can't stress how important that those pieces are going to be for decision and policymakers who are calling for more real-time information, more real-time insight, so that they can make better decisions in the moment. And that is the direction that we're moving in. And you'll see, if you read the literature today in evaluation, that's kind of the challenge that we're faced with, is how do we bring some of that foresight thinking into some of the evaluation approaches that we have traditionally used. And it's not to say that we're going to leave behind the old, but how do we blend the old with the new, so that we have a stronger approach moving forward. And my last point is that I, again, was blown away with, and I wrote down as I was listening to the presentations, was just how much empathy is in this group. As you all pose these questions, I'm really thinking deeply about the lived experience of the populations that you're doing this work around, that you're really trying to understand, walk in their shoes, and then think about questions that if you answer them, or can pose different ways to answer them, it's going to provide potential decision makers and policymakers with, in fact, more empathy for those particular populations. So I can say that that's not something that I was taught when I went through graduate school. That wasn't something that was, I think, valued at such a high level. But in my career, I have only seen that the researchers and evaluators that lead with empathy as well as evidence seem to get more traction with their work down the road. And so I just really wanted to encourage more of that. It probably is second nature to this group. And so I just maybe want to validate how incredibly important it is. So with that, and yet I'm going to wrap up and just say once again, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really looking forward to the questions that and the discussion that we could have after these comments. And yeah, and kudos to SICSS, just an amazing, amazing opportunity.
I'm going to hop back on screen here. And thank you all for joining us for this closing plenary. And I want to make sure we leave time and space for any questions that there might be about Mathematica, about Jeff's career, about Akira, about their investment in SICSS-Howard Mathematica. I want to make sure we leave lots of time and space for any questions that might be out there. And we also, after this, will leave time for final closing, final family discussion, and we'll close the way we started. So any questions for our closing plenary speaker? Let's jump in, folks. Thank you, James. Please jump on screen and ask your question.
Thank you, Jeff, for your amazing comments. It speaks to me a lot. I'm just curious about what your view is about people who have non-traditional backgrounds and yet are attempting things in the technology space. Can you speak to that from your own experience? And if there's any advice you have? Thank you.
James, I'm so glad you asked that question, actually. So from my own experience, right, I don't actually come from a technology background. And so a lot of what I have learned has been on the job. and through the generosity and expertise of others around me. And so I think first and foremost that, you do want to look for a certain amount of expertise and bring that into the work environment. But I also come from a space where a lot of what we need it comes from the willingness of people to learn it, and then also building upon their own lived experience in that space. And so I watched that firsthand, living and working in Kenya for a number of years, where watching data scientists sort of really grow their own skills without a lot of formal training, quite honestly, only to get it later after they were supported and validated in the work environment. And so really providing that supportive environment was the catalyst that they needed, and help them move on to other opportunities and get the skill sets and training that they needed. So that's why I don't know, James, for me, that's why I was most excited when I was hearing stories of people. Maybe I'm going to pick on the wrong person, but I think it was Beth who said, her focus was qualitative, and then she started working with some of these quantitative skills, or started scraping data and doing some of this work. And forgive me, Beth, if I'm calling the wrong person out, but not necessarily, like, that might have not necessarily been the skill set that that she would have leaned on, right? But just, again, experimenting and building that out. So Beth, I don't know if you're shaking your head because I got it wrong and I should be picking on somebody else, but
that was a no in agreement. I would not have pursued this.
Yeah. So I love that. What I mean, I see it in my kids, who have no formal training in computer science, and yet they feel totally enabled to go and try things just as the joy of a child, right? To go and go get themselves into the deep end with programming and again, trying things that just by trial and error. So I hope I answered your question, James. Please feel free to follow up if you need more specifics.
James, as the technologist in the room, I also wanted to kind of emphasize that the future is interdisciplinary. And the purpose of this program is to get you guys on the front line of blurring those lines between who the technologists are and who is not. Because we've got to stop that I'm the tech person and we're not the tech person. The most valuable people to our future are the ones who understand where technology can be applied to solve problems. And that's both if you're wearing a tech hat and if you're not wearing a tech hat. It's knowing where we can apply to add value, to solve problems and create value. So you go ahead and lean into it, even though you're not from the traditional tech background.
So I want to throw a question out as well. So, with the idea that we have multiple careers and wearing multiple hats, and these folks here may start their career one place, go somewhere else. I wonder what you look for in people that join your teams. Like, what are the skill sets? If we're going to align ourselves with, especially sort of professional, managerial, people sometimes call them soft skills. I think they're super important. What are those things you look for in people that you're like, I want that person on my team? Jeff, you want to start with that? And then Beth's got her hand up, so we'll move to Beth after Jeff and possibly Akira jump in on this one.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think I always start with willingness, that ability to kind of raise your hand and say, I'll take that on. I'll step forward, and that the ability to kind of step out, be a little bit over where your expertise or experience is, but just that willingness to say, yeah, I'll jump into the unknown. And I think that has a lot, as I read more and more about growth mindset, that has a lot to do with where folks, I think, increasingly are. I think we're training more people to come out of their programs, undergrad or even before now, with a growth mindset. where it's just, I'm here because learning is so critical for me. And I'm not afraid to learn. I'm not afraid to fail and then be very vulnerable about the failure, and then say, okay, how do I pick myself up and then keep moving on. I think, and by the way, hard to really like interview for that. I think this is about like getting a feeling for that as you talk to people about their experiences, and really understanding how vulnerable, how real they are about what they have learned from those aspects. So when I talk to people, I do ask them about their latest and greatest quote unquote failure. And I'm always happy to share, places where where that's happened to me as well. So.
Yeah, I think that's so on point, Jeff. I'll ask that question too, and I'll tell you guys, if you're interviewing and somebody asks you that question, do not answer the, oh, I worked too hard and I overworked myself and my team answer. We actually do want to hear about that time where things ended up really messy. And then what did you do coming out of that? And that that it's okay, because that's what we're looking for, is that one, the open mindset, the willingness to try, and the resilience to keep moving from there. Because I'll be honest with you, technology moves too fast for us not to have a growth mindset. And some technology ends up being very short-lived. So you have to, some technology moves are, get in that hype cycle, and they stay in the hype for a very short period of time, and they're like, yep, this didn't work out, or somebody else comes along and does it better. So we have to be okay with the idea that there's going to be times where we got it wrong. And then to keep moving on and learn the lessons. I'd say on the tech side, the most valuable thing outside of that growth mindset is a good storyteller. I really need people who can tell a story about how to apply tech. Most of us on the tech side are great engineers, but I also need great storytellers.
I just want to echo that. I think if you're on the evidence generation side, we are desperate for good storytellers. And some of them are in this room. Some of them already told wonderful stories about the work that they're doing. But that's the piece that when I talked about dynamic and actionable evidence, it is often accompanied with a very powerful story.
So Beth's got next. We're going to throw her the rock. Go ahead, Beth.
It's funny that you ended with this idea of stories, because I felt like I had some picture of Mathematica in my head before this, which was quite inaccurate. I'm learning. And in conversations just with the TAs and folks over the last week, I feel like I've gotten a really different picture of what kind of work you all do. But just in terms of stories, I'd love to hear from either of you about a project or anything that you all have worked on, or that Mathematica has worked on that you all are proud of, just to give us a sense, a better sense of the kind of work you all do. Thanks.
So for me, Beth, I'm still so new at Mathematica, joining in 2023. But one of the things that I am proud about is some of the work that we're doing in integrating. So Mathematica has an affiliate that's part of our company that is based in East Africa. And one of the things that I have been working on is, how do we get researchers that our East African colleagues more tied together with our US-based and our UK-based researchers and evaluators, just so that, again, we can more rapidly share that lived experience and also continue to tap in to talent on both sides of that equation, because it's so valuable to us. And, as a company, that's like our talent, our people, that's our number one asset. And so I have been so thrilled, actually, it's uncovering some of that talent as I've dove into Mathematica, and more than anything, just just providing a little bit of catalyst, and then watching our teams come together in seamless ways that don't even involve me, right? The only thing I did was, just open the door a crack, and then you watch people just kick it open and say, we're going to work together. We're going to collaborate in ways that we hadn't even thought of. And so maybe by next year, I'll have a number of projects that I can report on that they've already started to, go after and win projects together and produce really good research questions that their clients and funders are excited about. And my hope is that we're going to have some really amazing results that come from those collaborations. So stay tuned. See you next year.
And I'll also throw in there that Mathematica gives a significant amount of money to support projects. And unlike our other sites that are like, you've got 2 months to apply and then you're never allowed to apply again, we're committing to life. As long as this exists, if you have graduated, you can still apply. So you all can apply this coming year, the following year, the next 20 years. I can tell Jeff is nodding. He's dedicated to this for at least the next 100 years. So just keep, your grandkids can apply, so just know that is a great way to keep in touch as well. And, we have listservs and all sorts of things set up to keep you engaged. All right, more questions from, I know, Akira, I think you had a question, but if there are other questions getting
If you have time, I've got a question for Jeff.
Yes, go for it. Go jump in.
It's a doozy. So Jeff, I giggled and then I was really interested when I looked at your bio, and the phrase that stood out to me was focused on generating evidence that instigates action. And I just loved that. One, it rang true for me from my experience with you already. I loved that you used the word instigate because it gave me a little bit of a rabble rouser feel for you, which I love. But I was wondering if you might say something about instigating action and your experience on instigating action, because I think that's part of what we're looking to achieve here. We're all tackling some hard topics that are going to feel a little like instigation at times. So I was wondering whether you might offer some of your experience with that.
Yeah, probably in a previous experience that I had was, when I worked in global health, we at one point were working on a project where we were trying to convince ministries of health to use community health workers, which are, health workers with maybe, probably below high school level of education. Sometimes it's even less, right? Who are yet really responsible for a lot of what happens at the community level. And so we were trying to convince them that they were the best frontline provider for health services like malaria diagnosis and treatment, which requires the application of a simple blood test and also providing medication, an anti-malarial, basically, if someone is positive. And yet, because of a lot of challenges, a lot of ministries of health were not excited about, they wanted skilled providers, nurses or doctors to provide that support. And one of the things that we worked on was just showing with data what happens when you put those tools in the hands of a community health worker in a small geography, what happens to the case detection rate and what happens to the ability to actually resolve cases and actually tamp down or snuff out in some places the actual emergence of that disease. And so one of the things that was done, first of all, a lot of work was done that I'm not even responsible for, and a lot of kudos goes to those researchers. But one of the things that we did do was we helped make sure that that data moved for decision makers so that they could see over in almost real, like I would say near real time in terms of Ministry of Health data. So every month or every week, the changes in cases that were both actively and passively detected, and then how over time they went down because once community health workers were given those tools. It was super powerful. It was also super powerful to work on because you you knew theoretically what should happen, but you didn't know that it was all going to happen in this pretty dramatic way. And so that was something I got to be a part of, and then watch that get translated to a number of places, and then get put into policy and part of the Ministry of Health circulars, and then watch the roles of community health workers change nationally. And I think that only happened because we interrogated the data at first from a research perspective, and then kept instigating action, right? We just kept like, we'd do a pilot, and then we'd expand the pilot, and we would collect the data first by paper, and then it was collected electronically, so you could speed up the frequency by which you were showing this, and then start to run more advanced analysis that allowed people to see the change over time. And then the modelers got a hold of the data and then started to show what would happen, from a foresight perspective. Hey, this is what would happen if we rolled this out nationally. So again, not anything that I was, responsible for in, leading the charge, but I was part of that, those teams that helped do that. And it was just so powerful. It really helped shape, the direction that I went in terms of how I thought about and used data. That was a long one, Akira, but I guess you asked for it.
That was a great one.
I love that. Yeah.
I've got one more good one for you. I think it's a good one. And then we'll move towards closing, and we'll give the group a little bit of a break before we have our family debrief. So my last question is, a lot of us have been advised as we go into academe that our work is meant to be sort of behind that same firewall where a lot of our articles live. We're up in an ivory tower, we're behind a fence, and there's a small number of people who get to read our work. And I think the folks in this room, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, I think a lot of us want to have a greater impact, want to reach further and I think one of the challenges to having that growth mindset is just knowing what it's like on the other side of that wall. So what's it like to be one of these decision makers, to interact with decision makers? Give us the 360 on the world beyond the ivory tower. What's your day-to-day like, and what do we have to look forward to?
Well, I mean, I think these are people like anybody else, and I think that they, there's like awe on both sides of the equation. I think just like I felt when I walked into this room and listening to all of the work that you're all doing, and you're kind of just taking on in this sort of natural way. I see that same awe from decision makers as they interact with really bright, capable researchers. And I don't know, I think the key, if you will, is when you find decision makers who are willing. Some of the most powerful experience I've had with decision makers have been when they have sort of demystified for me what are the factors driving them towards both, good or bad, or sometimes it's hard to tell, but towards their decision points, right? And that their ability to be to demystify, to be more transparent about what's going on maybe politically, as that is in addition to what the evidence is saying. And so when you hear that story from them, when you hear them demystify their space, it helps you start to put into context that information, so you can help them. We get back to the storytelling, help them tell a much more cohesive story, so that they can satisfy these different factors of either their constituents or some of the political drivers that are in place for them. And I think that I don't know, that's pretty special. You don't always get to see that. It obviously takes a lot of time building up trust and a relationship with those folks. And I've been lucky enough to do that in a few places where I remember being in Bangladesh and just someone opening up for me, like pulling back the curtain saying like, hey, this is really how the decision is going to be made. So if you could just shape the evidence so that I can start to tell this story. Not they don't want us to change the evidence, but they wanted us to allow it to shape around their context, and allow them to be able to basically pace it so that it could be absorbable. That was really, really helpful and interesting. And I think the same goes for researchers on the other side who are willing to and interested in having that conversation, wanting to ask good questions, and making it safe for people to demystify their spaces.
And to close, to either of you have any closing thoughts, inspiration, otherwise, to leave us with? You basically get the last words of this institute before we go off camera. Anything you'd like us to leave us with? No pressure.
Sorry, is that to me? Oh,
Yes.
okay. Oh, wow. No,
Akira is averting her eyes right now conveniently.
No, I feel very lucky to have had this opportunity with you all, and I just want to keep cheering for you all. This, as I mentioned, I think in the start, this is the next generation. This is the group that's going to really push us. You all are experimenting with things that we could have never have dreamed of, 10 years ago, some of which even 5 years ago. And boy, we need that. We need your capability. We need your that exploration, that joyfulness, and in our workplaces, so we can tackle a lot of these tough challenges and tests that we have ahead. So, yeah, I would end there and encourage you all to just keep going after this institute breaks, of course.
Yeah, only thing I would add to what Jeff says is, just be seen and be heard. The inspiration behind this program is to have new voices enter the table that have different lived experiences and different perspectives on life, on data, and what the evidence means and how it should be applied. And I loved seeing you all today and hearing all of the things and different interests and geographies that you are applying your research to. And that's exactly what we wanted to see. So thank you. Keep it up.
Thank you for joining us. Please join me in thanking our speaker and the incredible multi-hyphenate Akira Bell.
Thank you all for watching. For more information on SICSS-Howard Mathematica, visit our website, follow us on social media, and join our email list.